I'm Kendall, and welcome to my Midnight Hour, where I read my spooky short fiction. If you like a little bit of a shiver, you might enjoy hearing my original works of short fiction. I have not posted for a while. Unfortunately, I had COVID 19 and sounded like a frog for about a month, so I had to hold off recording anything. So, in celebration of my voice sounding normal again and recovering from COVID 19, I have decided to start the new year off with a story I wrote last year during the pandemic with COVID 19 as the backdrop for the story. This really is a story about loneliness. While I was locked away with my family towards the beginning of the pandemic, I had a lot of feelings, just like everyone. It was disconcerting, and sometimes we didn't get all our groceries, and we were a little worried we might not have anything to wipe our bums for a while. But all in all, being stuck together was okay because we were together. Luckily, we like each other, and it really made me think about how there's a lot of people who are alone and were just by themselves. And I think the pandemic made a lot of people realize how truly alone they are. I joke that there will probably be a lot of people who are just aching to get married after this is all over. Anyway, that's how this story came to be. It just came to mind as I was reflecting on loneliness during the pandemic, and Quarantine Dreams is just a great title, so I had to write it. There's also a disturbing element about what happens to corpses when they're left to rot for a while in this story, which I blame my mother for. I have no idea the context, but for some reason, I have this very vivid memory of my mother telling me what happens if a body gets left and all the cleanup that would need to happen because of decay and leakage. She probably doesn't even remember that. We must have been watching a show that she felt she needed to explain to me when I was little. I have no idea why we were talking about that, but it was disturbing enough to me to know that that could even happen that it was burned into my brain. So that got mixed up into this story a little bit. I don't want to get too far into the subject because it's gross and will give away some of the plot. So without further ado, here is Quarantine Dreams. At first, quarantine didn't seem all that different from her old routine. Nicole had been working from home for years. It was the same old apartment and the same 9 to 5 grind. She used to go out to dinner with friends on Friday. Some Saturdays she worked, Saturday night at the club or sometimes the neighborhood bar. She headed to the gym in the morning 4 days a week. Now she couldn't go to the gym, but she didn't mind that all that much. She did try to get some activity in by jogging around her studio apartment, but she always felt kind of silly, even when she listened to music, and she was sure the downstairs neighbor didn't appreciate it much. She missed the social interaction of her friends and Saturday night, but she didn't so much miss the superficial romantic encounters those places tend to deliver. The COVID-19 pandemic had taken everyone by surprise. How long would it last? Nobody knew, and after about 6 weeks, Nicole had a new routine. Her groceries came with touchless delivery, delivered every Tuesday. Sometimes she had takeout, also delivered with no human interaction. She met with her girlfriends for a glass of wine on Fridays via an app on her phone. On Saturdays, she talked to her parents on the phone, which was a real improvement over her previous once a month chat with them. She read books on Saturdays, or sometimes toured the dating sites, looking to see if anyone at all was worth an actual conversation. Phone sex, maybe, but the thought of that was still a little too weird for her, especially with someone she'd never even met in person. Her days went quick, and they were full. Her work took up most of the hours, and it was the same, so it took a long time for her to realize that despite all the efforts to pretend otherwise, she was lonely. It was at night, when all was quiet, except for the whisper of the air conditioner that kept her studio apartment carefully climate controlled. She felt the loneliness creep in. That's when the dreams about Samuel began. How about this one? Have you seen it? It's pretty funny, Samuel said, holding the remote in one hand and Nicole's hand in the other. They sat in bed, comfortably clicking through choices of shows to watch for the evening. She felt his thumb move slowly up and down her palm, calm and loving. Samuel was in his late 30s, light brown curly hair cropped close to his head, and the loveliest hazel eyes she'd ever seen. Oh no, I haven't. It looks good. Should we watch it tonight? She asked, smiling up at him. A siren sounded outside, and Samuel got up to look out the window. As he stood up, he vanished, and Nicole realized the siren was her alarm going off. She woke to find herself slumped over on her bed, alone. Her neck was hanging down in an awkward position that most certainly would become a sore neck later that day. The television, which had been left on all night, murmured in the background. She was sitting off center, and another pillow was propped up to her right, and there was a slight sunken spot on the bed. For a moment she wondered if Samuel had really been there with her. The dream had seemed so real. Knowing it could not be true, she proclaimed loudly to herself, "Wow, I need a real date. Being trapped at home alone is making me go a little crazy." There was no way that anyone could have been in the apartment with her. As Nicole went about her days, her mind kept wandering back to her dreams of Samuel. She felt silly. How lonely she had to be to have a schoolgirl crush on a man who was just a dream. But she could feel herself falling in love with him, like a real person. She would think of him often and become distracted at work. She could smell the curry and the soft soy scent of the candle melting as it burned between them. He'd convinced her to order from the Thai restaurant down the street, the one she had never tried. "It's just so good," he said with pure delight as he brought another forkful to his mouth. "It's okay," she said with a shrug. "Just okay," he proclaimed. "I think you just didn't get it spicy enough. Try mine." He leaned towards her, holding out his fork, and then watched closely as she took a bite. "Okay, you're definitely right. Spicy is better. Can we trade?" She laughed. "No way," he said, "but I'll share just because I love you." He hadn't said it before. He knew it, and she knew it, and they both knew this was a special moment. She locked eyes with him, and after a moment's pause, she said softly, "I love you too, Sam." He reached for her hand under the table and squeezed it tightly. And then she was in bed again, and Samuel was gone, and she was alone. But she could still smell the candle. She sat up groggily, thinking about falling back asleep, but knowing it was better to make sure that there was no candle burning. As she walked out into the living space, she could see the candle glowing in the dim early morning light. It was the centerpiece on her small kitchen table for what appeared to be a dinner date that had ended with no cleanup. Remnants of takeout, two dirty dishes, two wine glasses, and an empty bottle filled the tabletop. She walked closer to the scene and stared in disbelief. All she remembered was her dream. She did not even remember ordering takeout the evening before or eating it, but there was the physical evidence, and the menu clearly marked Than's Cafe. The tablescape matched the exact details of her dream, but there was no Samuel, at least not in real life. What had happened here? Had she called the Thai restaurant in a daze, ordered two dinners, eaten both meals, and drank a whole bottle of wine? Had she had a candle-lit romantic dinner all on her own? She was beginning to feel like she was having a break from reality. She was certainly not well. She went into the bathroom. The overhead light assaulted her sleepy eyes as she looked at her reflection in the mirror and splashed cool water all over her face. She looked all right. She looked normal. While she was assessing herself, she felt something cool and wet drip onto her head. She reached up and touched the spot on her hair and then pulled her hand down to find a thick, brownish liquid coating her fingertips. For a moment, she thought she had hit her own head and it was her blood, but it was not bright red, and the putrid odor that rose from even the small amount on her hand made her gag. She felt another drop and she looked up. Her once white ceiling had a large brown ring spreading out from the light fixture, and small drops of the brownish liquid were beating down the light. She closed her eyes as the next drop came, and it fell on her face and slid down her cheek. She quickly backed up against the wall and stood there in shock, not knowing what to do and trying not to vomit from the smell. Something was terribly wrong in the apartment above her. She cleaned herself up in the kitchen, got dressed, and called the apartment manager. She arrived quickly, although it was only 6 a.m. on a Saturday. Martha was a stocky, older woman who lived on the first floor and had managed the apartment building for over 20 years. Masked, she came into the Nicole's apartment and took a quick look at the scene in the bathroom. "We're going to have to go check upstairs. Who knows what this is? I've never seen anything like it before." Nicole took this as an invitation to go along. It was possible the manager thought it would be safer in numbers, or perhaps just did not think to tell Nicole not to come along. Nicole grabbed her mask and followed Martha up the stairs and to apartment 401 that held the space exactly above her own apartment. Martha knocked heavily on the door. No response. She waited for about 30 seconds and then knocked again. No response. Martha sighed and took the heavy key ring off her belt and opened the apartment. Luckily, the chain was not latched and they entered easily. Hello? Martha called. Again, no response. Well, I'm going to go take a look at that bathroom. Nicole took a look around the apartment and walked over to the windowsill where a couple of pictures sat on the ledge. One was an older family photo, yellowed a bit with age, featuring two parents and a blonde girl and boy child. Nicole's mouth dropped open. The other picture was Samuel. He was in an army uniform and he was much younger than the Samuel she knew, but it was him. Nicole wondered if she was still dreaming. She turned around to see Martha coming back into the living area. I didn't think he was the type. What type? Asked Nicole. The type to commit suicide, Martha said. We have to go. I have to call the police. There's nothing we can do here. Nicole clarified. Samuel wasn't the type? Yes, Samuel. He lived here for years. Quiet, but he seemed like he was doing all right to me. But what do I know? A young man's not going to share his secrets with me. Martha shuffled out the door, Nicole tailing slowly. She had an urge to take the picture of Samuel and keep it for herself, but she hadn't really known the man. He probably had a family somewhere that would like those pictures. Tears started to stream down her face. As Martha locked the door, she noticed Nicole sobbing. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you know him well? Nicole shook her head. We went out a few times. He seemed like a nice guy. Martha put her arm around Nicole as they walked down the stairs and squeezed her shoulder tightly. He was a nice guy, Martha said. I just wish we had met at another time in our lives, Nicole said earnestly. When Nicole got to her apartment, she cleaned up the table, feeling in shock. She didn't know what had happened in her apartment the night before. Had she had dinner with a ghost? Here was the physical evidence, but she was sure she had dreamed all her experiences with Samuel. At the same time, she felt the sharp pain of his loss. She had truly fallen in love with Samuel, and here she was alone, feeling like she couldn't even claim the feelings of losing him because she had never actually met him. Feeling frustrated, she walked to the sink and began to wash the dishes. As she worked, she felt her hair move on her head, as if there was a slight breeze in her apartment. She reached up reflexively and patted down her hair, and for a moment there was a warmth as if there was another hand on her head. Samuel? She felt the hair by her ear move, and her ear tingled as he whispered, Is there such a thing as real life? I'll stay as long as you want me to. We're in love, and that's all that matters. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do enjoy listening, please like the episode, follow my podcast, or share with friends. I'll be back soon with another story to share. Not going to make any promises on a timeline because last time I did that, I got COVID, but I will be back with some news stories soon. See you next time.